Greetings. This is a real estate legacy episode one for my 14th episode. Types and benefits of ADUs. It's an accessory dwelling unit, particular to California, similar to an Ohana if you're in Hawaii. So what I'm going to talk about is what is an ADU and what types are there in California. And then I'll talk about the two different types, the typically two different types, the advantage of a detached ADU. That can be also Casita in Arizona. Advantage of an attached ADU. So we've got the detached and the attached, and then the criteria to decide which one is the best one for you in your current property. So without further ado, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Let's take a look at what the different types of ADUs are. Let's talk about what is the different types of ADUs. And in California, a residential property can have what they call an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, and a junior ADU, which is, I'll get into those details. So the reason for an ADU is it's a separate rental unit within the property, and you can add that because of the shortage of homes in California. You can add it to increase potential revenue on the property by having another rental unit, even if you started with a single family home. And again, need to decide what you're thinking about doing before you buy the property. It's a little hard to retrofit once you've kind of had the property and made it into something. So you have to kind of plan is before buying the home. And that's what I've done in my case. I've done both an ADU and a junior ADU. And again, determine the rental area for the property, what you're going to get for that ADU, because you're going to have the costs are pretty much fixed. If you buy a separate structure, or if you're doing a garage build out or some other method of putting an ADU in, the costs are pretty much the same regardless of where you do it in California. The materials are the materials. Labor might be a little bit different in different areas, but in general it's the same. And then again, the planning groups and the permit process is pretty much, I won't call it standard, but it's consistent across the state. So anyway, let's talk about the two. First, there's the detached, and that's really a separate structure. And there you get into all kinds of setback rules enforced depending on the city-county restrictions. I know in the cities it's a 4-foot setback, but I believe some of the counties have different settings. So are you going to be buying a prefab unit, or are you going to actually have somebody build it from the ground up, what they call a stick built? And again, it's a separate building from the main house, so there'll be space between them, and that's one of the setbacks you have to take into consideration. The cost can be more than this, but it's typically, I think the minimum you can do $200K. There's some I've seen some units that you can buy, and sort of build it out yourself. Like even Amazon, I think, sells some structures, and they seem really cheap, but by the time you add in all the other stuff, it gets to be, I think it's fair to say 200K, 400K may not be the max, but it's pretty close to that if you're putting up a 1,200 square foot prefab ADU. Could be a little bit more, but that's just to give you a general price range. And again, typically you want a separate entrance driveway for a detached building, because it is kind of a separate house, and you want to have as much of that as possible to make it feel like you have a separate home, because it is a separate building. But again, trade-off is sometimes there just might be a walk path to the side of the house to the back yard, which is often where they're put, because the front yard you're going to have issues with setbacks to the street. And then the junior ADU, and that's limited to 500 square feet. That's the definition of it. It's an attached building. Typically the cost is, you can do it for less, but 90K to 140K is a good, depending on material levels and sort of the size you want to make it work. Also depends on, if you're just doing electric, or if you're actually doing separate water hookups and things like that, can be quite more expensive with all the permits for water meters and so forth, which you typically have on a separate ADU. Anyway, part of the original structure and must be attached. And it's, again, the perfect scenario where most of this is done is the garage conversion or turning a section of the house that might have been a work area into an ADU. Some people um, break off their units as part of their house and sort of turning it into almost like a duplex, but not quite that, because there's usually typically not a separate garage. The one thing about garage conversions, they do not require off-street parking in many cities, and then the specific one I'm speaking of is the one in Napa where I am. Okay, let's talk about the advantage of a detached ADU. And again, the maximum size, is best I know, at least in California, I believe it's 1,200 square feet. I suspect you can get them bigger in some situations, but what I've mostly seen is 1,200 square feet wherever I've looked. I like having a separate entrance. When I did mine, I actually had a plan with a corner lot. And again, most jurisdictions, an ADU can have a full kitchen. Actually, in some counties, you can't have a kitchen even if you call it an ADU. It's really meant more for like a pool or something like that. It's not meant to have separate houses on it. And again, that's Napa County has restrictions on that. And again, check with the local jurisdiction before you do that. Actually, Napa has a really good setup where you give them a lot of information, you pick the address, and it'll tell you what is acceptable. So when an ADU is perfect, you have a corner lot with a separate driveway. That's the one where I did it. And again, another perfect thing is allows for off-street parking, so that if you don't have access to a separate one, you can have off-street parking. The lot is big enough for each building to have a separate yard and fence. That way it allows privacy. It feels like two homes on the property, and that'll increase the rents that you can get for it. Separate utilities are possible, so each unit can have utilities of their own, and the owner is not responsible for separate utilities. That makes it feel like you really do have two homes on a lot, and that's the best, for when you have a detached ADU. If you can treat it as if it were two separate homes, I think that's the most ideal. Let's talk about the attached. Well, the advantage of the attached ADU is a building permit is more simple since there's no expansion of the building or impact on setbacks. Utilities are already running to the property, and you're usually going to tap off them. The only thing I typically am going to do is put a new electric meter in and try to do everything electric. In my case, that's what I'm doing. You can have separate gas, but I think having gas meters gets to be really expensive, and separate water meters is very expensive because I did that with the detached. So you start to increase prices quite a bit. I've seen 350 square foot one bedroom units, but typically 400 to 500 is going to be better for the one bedroom units, and that has a full kitchen, a full bedroom, and a bathroom with a shower and bath combo. And the reason for that, and at least in the case of Napa, is if you have that, then you can actually have and be an investor and have two separate units, and you can do it multiple times. If it has shared bathrooms with the house, then it can only be the house that is your single family residence. So that's a big difference. So something to really consider when you're in the planning process. The driveway is going to be parking if you're using the garage build out or turning potentially some other part of the house. Again, other things to consider is where's the access to the water, sewer connections. The layout is going to be taking advantage of where existing access to utilities. And again, the elimination of garage may affect rental rates. The other thing to consider is, the layout where the utilities are. That's really important when you do the layout. And again, the permit process, which we'll talk about separately in another video, I'll walk you through once you've decided on the basic type of ADU. Okay, since you can do both, I just wanted to walk you through what the criteria to decide on both and what you should consider. So it comes down to lot size. If the lot is not big enough to put both an ADU and a junior ADU, or you don't have access, if you're not on a corner lot, then that's really the bottleneck. And you can decide that based on when you're doing it. An ADU needs to fit and not violate setbacks. The biggest setback actually is the street, because that doesn't change. The other setbacks are typically 4 feet. So, and again, access to the ADU impacting the main house, you don't want to interrupt privacy. You got to look at where the windows are to make sure everybody's not looking in every other bedroom. It's just not going to be a great rental situation depending on how you do that. Identify a contractor, and if you happen to be owner occupied, that means that you don't need to have a licensed contractor. You want to have a contractor who you're going to still have to follow all of the code and the permits, so you need to do that, but they don't have to be a fully licensed contractor, and that can save you some money. The other thing to look at, does the neighborhood have other multi-unit properties or other rentals? If there aren't a lot of rentals, not so that you need a ton of them, but if there should be a neighborhood that has that. And you should also, again, having 3 rentals on one lot where you have an ADU, junior ADU in the house is a bit of a challenge when the lot has been set up for one. But so typically I've only done one or the other, not both. So that's kind of my general rule. Having the utilities work for both the owner and the tenant. So if you just have electric on one, you're still going to pay the water and sewer probably as a tenant. But if you have a detached ADU, then you typically can separate all the utilities, and then the utilities get paid for by the tenant. So that's just something to consideration. And then there's the cost. Can you afford both an ADU, a junior ADU, and maintain the house? And then there's the whole process of while you're doing the construction, how do you fund all of this and those kind of things. But that is another criteria for another day. And lastly, I wanted to have a slide here quickly. Here, I'm a real estate agent, so all of this is, I've got my DRE number for the state of California, my phone number, and then I work with Elizabeth Alcott and Associates, a part of Place and Guide Real Estate. So I want to share all that since I am a real estate agent and want to be transparent about that.